a very brief presentation on the African Union AI Continental Strategy, giving you a bit of its background and objectives. Then after that, we will go into a panel discussion where I will introduce to you three of our amazing panelists who have done diverse work with respect to artificial intelligence and policy, have done work with respect to which brings up nuances of gender and how policy is implemented within the African continent. So we will have a look at that and just go through any of the questions or reflections that you may have throughout this discussion. I'm going to put on my camera so you can see me. So there I am. I hope I'm visible enough to everybody. All right. So I think I will begin with the brief presentation on the AU AI Continental Strategy. Once again, just looking at its background and objectives. So we will have a brief introduction, then we will look at what the AU AI strategy is, and then we will highlight a few observations of the AU AI Continental Strategy, which will segue into what the panel discussion will basically be about. So yeah, we can proceed. So as technology is continuing to shape the world and how the world is evolving with respect to technology, we are also noting that within Africa, technology is also growing, especially emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence. And as a regional bloc, the African Union has also recognized the pivotal role of artificial intelligence in driving socio-economic development across the continent. So with this, this has also generated a need for the creation of policy, not just regionally within Africa, but also worldwide. I'm sure you've noted that the European Union has just published its AU AI Act, which is something that has been quite big, and hoping that it wouldn't necessarily have a Brussels effect like the GDPR, but it's going to be a core policy with respect to AI regulation, not just within Europe, but it is likely to impact how AI policy is viewed across the world. The US is also making strides with its AI Bill of Rights as well. And we are seeing very many countries coming up with numerous elements of regulation of artificial intelligence. With that, we're also seeing African countries that are developing national AI strategies. We are seeing Rwanda, we are seeing Mauritius, we're seeing Egypt. Egypt and Mauritius have so far been one of the first to have developed their national AI strategies, which speak to AI utilizations and elements of AI policy regulation. We're also seeing Rwanda has recently also published its national AI strategy as well. And as this continues to grow, we are seeing a trend whereby there's a drive to regulate artificial intelligence in Africa. And of course, the African Union has also recognized this. So with the African Union, this specifically can be seen through one of its key resolutions, which is Resolution 473, on the need to undertake a study on human and people's rights and interlinking it with artificial intelligence, robotics, and other new and emerging technologies within Africa. So prior to this, we had the 2019 Shamar El-Sheikh regulation. We had the 2019 Shamar El-Sheikh regulation, which spoke on the creation, which was a declaration that specifically focused on the Africa Digital Transformation Strategy, which looked at the African strategy from 2020 up until 2030. And it's still sort of ongoing. And within that declaration and looking at the African Transformation Digital Strategy, we find that there was a call. For development of a group on artificial intelligence to study and develop the common African stance on AI, to develop capacity building frameworks, and also develop AI think tanks to assess and recommend projects that are aligned with, again, Agenda 2063, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals. So with this, you're also seeing that they're taking a trajectory towards AI policy and recognizing AI utilizations in Africa and the need of interlinking it with the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. So what is the AU AI Continental Strategy all about, and what do we know about it so far? So the AU AI Continental Strategy is being developed by the African Union High-Level Panel on Emerging Technologies, APET, and the African Union Development Agency, UAD, and NEPAD. So they have been developing this strategy from around February to March of 2023. And the process of developing this strategy began way back in May of 2020, with several workshops that were being held in Senegal. And the core essence of these writing workshops was an emphasis on the need for cautious review and adoption of the strategy to ensure that it is not obsolete in the near future. So with technology, we've always had the line that technology always supersedes regulation, technology always supersedes policy. So with this specific continental strategy, they're trying to also ensure that in as much as it's being developed, technology doesn't surpass it, or they're trying to preempt and be predictive in their regulatory framework development. So what are the actual objectives of this strategy? The goal of this strategy is to develop a comprehensive one that will guide African countries on how to support inclusive and sustainable AI, enable socio-economic transformation within the continent. And this will significantly be achieved by harnessing artificial intelligence for socio-economic development and ensuring that it is ethically inclusive by adopting a human-centric approach to AI. So it's very neatly worded, or rather wordy, for lack of a better term. And what it basically means is that the objectives of this strategy is to ensure that AI is ethical, AI is inclusive, and it adopts a human-centric approach to AI. In that artificial intelligence that is being developed and being utilized and being deployed is centered on what the human experience generally is. So the strategy also aims on leveraging the opportunities that emerging technologies offer while mitigating potential risks and negative impacts. So we're also noting that one of the objectives of this strategy is to keep in mind that there are specific harms that come with the use of artificial intelligence, and the strategy is going to sort of bring out ways in which to mitigate those harms. So it also seeks to address concerns regarding job losses, enhancing job creation opportunities, and through the integration of AI in various industries. So within the African continent, we are noting that there's three key industries. Okay, there's multiple industries and sectors in which AI is currently being utilized, but we are seeing a lot of AI utilization in fintech. We're seeing a lot of AI utilization in health. We're seeing a lot of AI utilization in education. We're also seeing governments through their e-government platforms sort of trying to leverage AI in different ways within the African continent. And one of the key impacts that have been noted with the use of AI is that it will cause job loss in specific areas. And they are also sort of trying to handle this and mitigate this, and we are anticipating that they will also talk about how they would be able to mitigate the elements of job loss or enhance job creation within the specific industries that are significantly leveraging AI so far within the continent. So with this, they're also trying to ensure that through addressing the issues with job loss and also addressing job creation, they're trying to ensure that they foster human capital development, as well as skills development in agriculture, health, finance, telecommunications, transportation, water management, mining, and also looking at potential risks and negative impacts that it may have to these specific industries when AI is leveraged. So what are some of the observations that we are making with respect to not just the AUA continental strategy, but generally the trend with the development of AI policy within Africa? So we are seeing that we need to look at specifically what is the participatory nature of developing this strategy, who has been in the room, who has been included with respect to looking at what the objectives of the strategy are, which countries have been included in the room, which stakeholders specifically have tried to have been included in the development of this strategy. We're also looking at the involvement of African states in the development processes, again, going back to which African states have been in the room when the strategy is being discussed, what key elements in terms of implementation for those specific countries and those specific states have been included in the developmental processes. Also, just for those of you who are in the room, have you heard that maybe your countries, your states, or your government representatives have also been associated with the creation of the AU AI Continental Strategy? And then we are noting that there's a specific trend with respect to the development of AI policy within Africa and the approach that the regional bloc has decided to take. So you'll see on a national level the fact that there's national AI strategies. People are going towards the development of national AI strategies. I know Kenya is also in the process of developing one, which is also highlighted in its digital transformation blueprint, I think. That's the name. They've sort of highlighted the need for creation of a national AI strategy in that. Again, going back to what I said earlier, the fact that we are noting countries like Egypt, Mauritius, we have Rwanda, we have Senegal somewhere in there, who are also in the processes, who have also developed their national AI strategies to sort of begin, I think, the foundational basis for the reflection of what AI policy in Africa could be. Also, we are trying to ensure that we note that with the creation of these specific policies that relate to AI in Africa, in as much as it's regional, how does it impact individual national states? How does it impact other regional blocs like ECOWAS and COMESA? How does it impact trade in that element? Does this type of policy sort of bring in also gender aspects? Does it cover the digital divide as well? Will it be covering those conversations with respect to that? When it comes to the harms to marginalized communities, have we highlighted or have we identified what potential harms are there to marginalized communities that are likely to be exacerbated by the utilization of artificial intelligence in different countries and in different communities? So with that brief backdrop, that's what's going to inform the structuring of our conversation on AI policy in Africa today, with the backdrop of the AU AI Continental Strategy. Also noting that they have already released two documents. There's a white paper and there's a roadmap for the creation of AU AI Continental Strategy, which basically frames out areas in which AI is being utilized in the continent, gives consideration to the risks and the harms that again come up. I'm hearing you can't hear me properly. Please confirm that you can.
I can hear you properly.
Okay. All right. So going back to that, noting that through a launch that was a webinar that was held yesterday, the AUAI, the team that was dealing with the AUAI Continental Strategy, released two key documents, which is a white paper and the roadmap for the AUAI Continental Strategy, which gives specific observations with respect to ethical AI, with respect to utilization of AI within the continent, with respect to how it will how it will be sustainable, and how it will impact the social economic environment in Africa, how it will impact trade, issues of trade and such like matters. So it is with that backdrop that we will be having a conversation on this webinar today. And with that, I think we can segue to the panel discussion and allow me to introduce the panelists to you. So today we are joined by three amazing panelists who, as I mentioned earlier again, have done and contributed significantly to conversations with respect to artificial intelligence in Africa. We have Dr. Angela Ndaka, we have Dr. Tomiwa, and we also have Bobina. So I will read a brief bio, just so that you are familiar with what they do and their work. So I'll begin with Dr. Angela Ndaka. Dr. Angela Ndaka is a multi-award winner and tech ethics and policy thought leader whose focus and interests are in complex and critical AI and emerging technology discourses. She has recently completed her PhD in sociology and gender studies at the University of Otago in New Zealand. Her research study focused on sustainable artificial intelligence, techno-futures. Her dissertation specifically focused on social ontologies that shape AI design and adoption in agtech ecosystems in New Zealand. Angela holds other qualifications such as public policy from the Australian National University, intercultural and multi-stakeholder dialogues, and education from Kenyatta University. Currently, she is an early career researcher in critical socio-ethical studies on AI and other emerging technologies. So welcome, Dr. Angela. Then we have Bobina Zofa. Bobina is an interdisciplinary data and digital rights researcher at Policy. In her work, she currently focuses on researching data governance, as well as the development, adoption, and deployment of artificial intelligence on the African continent and how that particularly affects African women. In this, she specifically tackles issues of ethics, human digital rights, justice, decoloniality, policy, intersectionality, and other Afro-feminist data and digital ideas. Welcome, Bobina. Then we have Dr. Tomiwa. He is an expert researcher and a policy analyst with focus on human rights and new technologies. Currently, he is a postdoctoral research fellow and a project coordinator at the Center for Human Rights, Faculty of Law, University of Pretoria. His postgraduate qualifications include master's and doctorate degrees from the center. His skills include research, program management, stakeholder management, effective communication, and strategic advisory. So welcome, Dr. Tomila. Yeah, so I think everybody can see, and we can go right ahead to a more detailed conversation. So there's a set of questions, so I'll just be running through the set of questions, and we'll be able to have an interactive conversation based on the questions that pop up. Again, to the participants who are listening in, you're invited to drop in your comments in the chat section, and they will be flagged down as we continue the conversation. So the first query will go to Bobina. So Bobina, currently, what does AI policy look like in Africa? And for especially for African countries that have national AI strategies or policies, what would be the key priorities that would be addressed in these documents or have been addressed within the documents?
All right, thank you. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're joining us from. Bobina Zulfa, and pleasure to be a part of this conversation. So I will, I want to just very briefly go over the policies and go over, I think, more to the part that feeds into what this discussion is about, which is recommendations to the strategy. So in regard to the policy direction that I think is the most desirable. So first, I think, you've gone over some of this yourself, Florence, with the intro, but I think, when you look at policy making across the continent, you find, for example, you talked about from the AU, NEPAD, who just put out the draft document you spoke about, to the, ACH, the African Commission for Human and People's Rights, and the Resolution 473 committee that's been working on some of that, and then to the work that the Malabo Convention did that sort of trickled down to the data protection acts across the continent. I think you find the bulk of policy there because of obviously data centrality to AI systems. But just away from that, I think what I think would be a great way to look at policy making across the continent would be to look at these indicators. First, which is, just to ascertain, what direction or how is policymaking happening currently. Is one, does a country have dedicated national AI legislation? So you find a number of countries, you mentioned Kenya is in the process of coming up with one, have some, we've seen like Mauritius, which has an AI strategy from some years back. I think it was the first country too, and now more countries are in the process of developing, and some have just put out their strategies, like Rwanda. I think there is also the indicator of, does the country's data protection legislation attend to automated decision making? So I think when you look at a lot of our data protection acts, automated decision making is spoken about in a very vague manner. There is language around profiling, but I also think it comes down to implementation. Has any of this worked? Has it been practicable in terms of legislating where profiling or even the language that is used when it comes to automated processing happens? And then there is the other indicator, I think, is AI a priority when it comes to countries' current national development plans? Because I think then that can tell, in a sense, whether a country is interested in, is going to start working on some sort of policy making, or has already started, or is continuing with what they've been working on. So, but away from that, I think looking at those indicators, and if you look at each of them country by country, and you're able to, see where different countries fall under those, I think what that gives is a picture of numbers. But as we all know, I don't think numbers tell the full picture. And so, for instance, I skimmed through it. I haven't read it in depth, but the draft AI Continental Roadmap by Oda Nepad. And I think for me now, I'm getting to the part of, what has been the policy approach? And so I think about it as the ideological thinking that has sort of guided policy making when it comes to AI policy making on the continent. And so I think from skimming very quickly through the draft AI Continental Roadmap, I found
the partners. I believe it.
Was someone saying something? No. Okay. Sorry about that. Well, I was saying, from just, it was for me very, for lack of a better word, disappointing to look at it. And the very first thing that comes out very strongly is, again, we're approaching policy making for AI through this developmentalist lens. We're again looking at policy making for yet another industrial revolution, for lack of a better word here, through this lens of development and economic growth. And I think it is very defeatist in such a great way, because well, I think first it fits into these narratives of, I saw the language of the Africa we want, but it is really these narratives of, Africa rising and etc. And I think it is problematic because when you look at just from the other industrial revolutions, whether it is just the most recent, we have used this developmental approach to, approach policy making, and it has proven to not work for the continent because it does not tell the full story of our context, our realities, and our needs as a people. So for the AU, thinking for the continent as a whole, I think not enough has gone into thinking about what, as a people, we want out of AI systems. And so I think, and again, for me, I think this ties in with my work, which is very feminist leaning. You will find that, there is, I believe there is, a better way for policy to guide thinking around adoption and development of AI systems that isn't just this developmentalist angle or lens. And I think, a good contrast would be with just the rest of tech policy, which has existed, before AI policy, and AI policy is a subset of it. We have seen from e-government to these notions of e-democracy to digital governance, where we're still approaching it through the lens of development and economic growth. And it hasn't worked. When you look at where AI systems are being developed or adopted across the continent, from consumer tech, where big tech is just coming down on us and is basically replicating the extraction that has been happening for so long. And it is continuing to happen with the current data digital infrastructure that we have in place, even with AI systems. It again goes to show, for the tech policy that, everyone thought, or at least our governments were purporting to bring us this development. And you find, I think the language is even very insidious, speaking to, oh, now we're going to streamline processes, we're going to bridge digital divides. And you look at the case studies of what's happening. I know case studies of AI, at least development, much of it is happening in academia here in the continent. Some, private industry players, Masahane, I know the Common Voice project. And I think, look at, for example, you could just use the example of the Common Voice Mozilla project. What they're trying to do is, get us included in a digital space where we've been basically excluded because our languages were not on there. I do not think you would frame that as development. And I do not think, that speaking against the developmentalist approach is basically saying we do not need to focus on development. I think it is saying that our context, our reality does not need to, we should learn from the past policy making that has taken this lens, and it didn't serve us. It fed into these neoliberal, neo-colonialist narratives that, oh, now Africa is waking up to be a part of the markets, and we're just consumers, And I think then what I think essentially then we should be trying to do is to design policies that factor in our diversities as African people, our needs that are so diverse, our realities that are so diverse, and to move away from this notion of we're just markets. We're not just markets. We are people who are very, Africa is now, predominantly a young population with so many ideas and, to bring forth, etc. So I think for me, I just looked at, this is how I'd fit into that conversation. I think my recommendation would be to move away from that developmentalist approach. I think that there is approaches that could better fit our context. We could look at confronting AI exploitation. I think the president of Kenya a few days ago, weeks, I think, was speaking to, we have 23,000 workers with Apple, and you're like, which workers, which Kenyans are working with Apple? And you look at the labor they're doing, and it is very, it's not labor you would categorically speak of as, this is great work that they're doing. So I think we could speak to confronting AI exploitation. We could speak to harmonization of individual and collective rights for us as a continent in our approach of AI policies. Because again, like I was saying, for the Data Protection Act, you find that this almost copy paste we have done from, say, the GDPR to bring down to our local, policies around this that doesn't capture our context. It's almost lazy, like we did not take the time to think through, and I think that's the work. And at least from a feminist perspective, where we encourage, that getting into that work, being able to plan for your context, for your reality, because it's easy to just go and do a copy paste and bring down things in our context, and they end up not working for us. And so I think there is need to think about approaches to policy making that move away from this universalist approach of AI systems, like they have done previously with technologies, that look at them as like apolitical or ahistorical, like we don't have a history that has just kept us on the nether end of this infrastructure, the digital infrastructure. I'll stop there. Welcome to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your contributions, Bobina. So you've really teased out the specific approach that this Continental Strategy, just based on the roadmap and the working paper and the white paper, is sort of already taking with respect to how it would like to look at AI governance and AI policy within Africa. So just taking a piggyback from that conversation, please. I would go on to looking at apologies for that. Allow me to pick up from what I was just saying or previously talking about. So picking up from the approaches that Bobina has already teased out in the conversation, I would like to ask Dr. Angela, what are the anticipated challenges to general implementation of AI policy in Africa, considering the already existing national AI strategies and the approach that the EU Continental Strategy is taking?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And Florence, you don't have to apologize for the baby. I want to believe that we have so many feminist believers here that having a child is part of this particular conversation. And anyway, looking at what we are talking about, the policy and strategies, let me just unpack what I think about policy first from a policy expert perspective, that we have to start looking at policy from the fact that policy should be responsible. From where I stand, policy should be responsive, and policy should be able to respond to alternative knowledges. And I think that's part of what Bobina was unpacking, talking about responsibility is about policy should be designed in the interest of citizens, and responsiveness means it responds to the aspirations, needs, and values of the regional citizens, and responsible means that it acknowledges existence of alternative knowledges and alternative values, cultures, and all that. And this brings us to where the question that you raised, what are the anticipated challenges? And from where I stand, what do I see as some of the anticipated challenges? Number one, we're looking at the several documents that AU is working on. I can see a very big mismatch of what we are talking about, regional goals and national goals, because I got an opportunity of looking at the regional documents versus the national, some of the national documents in some work that I'm doing. And you can almost see that there are agendas and interests that are playing. Every country in Africa is trying to pursue its own agenda. And what we call socio-technical agenda. We want to be seen to be doing something about whatever technology, harnessing AI and probably leveraging on it and all that. And some of the documents you can see everyone is pursuing their own thing. But one thing that is very common in all of them is that there is a big push for what Bobina highlighted, that there's a nationalist approach versus also a techno-nationalist approach to the policy making, where the agenda is just pushing for unlimited growth of technology, which definitely behind it is a push for the growth of AI industry. And it really, there's a lot of silences and a lot of invisibilities in terms of where are the interests of the African citizen in this particular conversation, in this particular document. Who are they serving in the first place? Who are they reaching out? Whose needs are we trying to meet when we are looking at these particular policy documents? And at the elevation of the technology growth, definitely is trying to present a mythical solution. A mythical, ideology of tech being a solution to all African social problems. But my question would be, is it the only solution that we have? Or do we have alternative solutions? Number two, have we tapped into what we have around? And so there's a mismatch of regional goals and national goals, and that is going to build a bit of challenge. I was looking at how many countries have ratified so far, and I've seen like less than 20 countries have ratified some of these documents, and which means that most of them are not agreeable in terms of the direction that this is taking, or AI, or whatever it is that we are doing is taking. Number two, there's a mismatch for me of the strategies that we are building with the societal values and aspirations and needs. What are our needs? I would say I'm lucky enough to have stayed in a global north, and I know from the global south needs. For instance, let me just talk about the project that I was in working on my PhD, and part of why we were creating AI solutions was to solve labor issues. The fact that there are no laborers to do the work. And we were struggling with the idea that 2020, 2021, New Zealand could not be able to bring on board people from the global south to come and do harvests in the New Zealand farms. And so they needed technical solutions to solve labor problems so that they can be able to harvest their produce, and they can be able to prune their produce and all that. But does Africa have labor problems? Or do we have underemployment, unemployment, which means that technically the agendas of the global south and global north are totally different. So what are our needs in terms of labor? What are our needs in terms of language issues? What are our values? What values do these particular ecosystems carry? And all that. And you can see that that mismatch is going to cause problem, because at the end of the day, the question will be, whose AI are we creating, or whose AI are we promoting around here? Then that challenge that I see, and which probably now it looks a little bit disguised, is the dominance of, and it's very layered, that you can see bits and pieces of all strategies that are being developed, be it regional or national. There is a lot of dominance of STEM, science. And when I'm talking about science, I am relating it with any other knowledge, including indigenous and social knowledges and all these ones, which are all tied into AI. AI is not a STEM issue, or AI is not a STEM solution. It is a solution created by STEM coming to a society, and a society that has multiple of knowledges that are in play, and it's going to be permeating virtually in every industry. So it's going to be shaping industries, it's going to be shaping people, it's going to be shaping values, it's going to be changing everything. And so every sector needs to be part of this particular conversation. Every knowledge needs to be part of this particular conversation. Every culture in Africa needs to be part of this particular problem. But ideally, from the strategies that we're reading, you can see it's an elevation of STEM and how STEM is going to grow. But is STEM growing in Africa? Because it isn't our STEM. It is technology from other people who are imposing it in Africa and all that. And so you can also see that the conversations around it also, you'd ask questions like, who is funding it? Because look at who is funding the African strategies. I'm sorry to say that it's mostly bilateral organizations and large tech companies. They are the ones that are funding policy agenda for Africa. That is the same thing that is playing along within the national level ranks. And so I would cite someone like Jasanoff, who would say that when in such instruments are being developed, the question would be, whose visions are being entrenched in this particular instrument? Because definitely whoever funding is bringing their own interest on board. And there is a lot of lobbying, there will be a lot of whatever. Those who are in the policy space know that for a policy to be developed, there's a lot of lobbying that happens. And when I'm bringing money, I'm bringing my interest. And I want my interest to be taken into consideration. Governments are not innocent because also governments have their own interest. I mean, if we are dealing with a US government, they would like tech from US to be adopted in Africa. So their interests also have to be taken care of and all this. And that is where the quagmire of the confusion is coming. At what level do our interests get into these particular documents? And at what level do we say that Africa interests are in this particular conversation? Because the dominating knowledge just are competing for who takes what and which agenda gets enrolled in our policy instruments. And then ideally, the whole idea of that we are dealing with our whole imposed solutions. They are all imposed. They will come, everyone seems to know our problems, everyone seems to know these are African problems and these are the problems that we solve. I've always asked myself, who went to African villages and asked Africa, what are your problems? Because it seems like the problems are already defined and solutions are already running and the agendas are already running for the solutions to be solved, and the policy instruments are already being staged to support that particular growth. And I know it always sounds melodramatic when someone says that we need to go back to the villages, to the same people that these instruments are being developed, in what we are calling globalized, not global. Globalized because they are interconnected nodes of the global north, but ideally they are presented as global, and we are picking it and we are embracing it as our visions. But with AI and the emerging technologies, we cannot talk about a singular future in which that singular future, we are not part of that, defining that singular future. So as long as we are not part of the definition, then that singular future is basically prescribed for us. And the policy documents that are playing along are also prescriptions, because they are funded by the global north and they are playing along to just elevate us to be seen to be part of this particular conversation. But the question is, are we? So let me end up there as part of the anticipated challenges. Probably the conversation will continue as we go.
Thank you so much for your contributions, Dr. Angela. They have been quite insightful, especially in looking at what the role of the global north has been in shaping what AI policy, African AI policy, is likely to look at, shaping the needs that are seemingly coming up and propping up, and the utilizations that are being taken up by different African countries in terms of the needs that artificial intelligence is supposed to sort of handle. You'll notice that when you read most of articles relating to AI in Africa, or even research papers relating to AI in Africa, you'll note that one of the key things that's always there is AI is going to help solve a number of the needs of the African continent, and those needs are not always clearly defined as either our needs or needs that are very specific to different African countries or different African communities. Those needs are not often defined. So in keeping it within that lens of in the influence of sort of foreign dominance within AI policy in Africa and AI utilization in Africa, Dr. Tomiwa, my question to you is a bit loaded, but I'm hoping, I know you can handle it. So Dr. Tomiwa, so Africa is currently dominated by foreign technology and AI companies whose objectives and approaches may likely be hindering the realization of continental development. So how do you anticipate that the continental AI strategy will present opportunities to foster a more local content and equitable access within the infrastructure with respect to AI utilization, development, and deployment?
Thank you very much, Florence, for the introduction earlier on, and also thank you to other panelists that have spoken before me. They've, in my view, done a very fine work when it comes to examining this, the current development and also some of the challenges that are bedeviling AI strategy, not only continentally, but also nationally. But I would like to take a slightly different approach.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to begin by saying that, I agree to a very large extent with my panelists that have spoken before. But I must say that developing or implementing a strategy, whether broadly related to digital policy or more specific to emerging technologies like AI in African context is very difficult. Dr. Ndaka said earlier on that who's going to the villages? How many people are ready to go to the villages to understand what the needs are when it comes to AI? These are the practical questions. And that's to tell you that there are no easy answers. And there are no easy answers also because there are, many moving parts that are complex, political, and require critical and tough thinking. Additionally, I also think that it should be clear, in the midst of this, that the African Union cannot do everything because the buck, especially when it concerns implementing digital policy, stops at the table of AU member states, not necessarily the AU. But that said, this is not the excuse, what has been said before with how, the process has gone on so far. For example, it is true that there's a huge lack of transparency on how regional institutions develop digital policies, and the extent of public participation in these policies, they are not clear. However, notwithstanding, those issues, we still have the perennial question is, how do we move forward in spite of, the challenges that we face? We still have the responsibility of defining the way forward. And based on that, I must say that, some of the ideas that I'll be sharing that could be useful for the Continental AI strategy are not exhaustive, not in any way, but they are just ideas that could, get us thinking towards, in particular, developing, local content, which I think is one of the many solutions to ensuring that we address the problem of technological, dumping in the region. Let me start by saying that, in a resource that I consulted. It was a report by United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. And one of the things that they identified, in the report is that, aside the fact that, of course, Africa in general, both the Saharan and Northern Africa, lowest in readiness for the creation of frontier technologies. The report identified, 5 reasons, for low ranking, and these include demographic changes. Africa is home to one of the fastest growing populations. It also is due to lower technological and innovation capabilities, slow diversification, weak financing mechanisms, and what I'll be, focusing a little bit more as we go on is the challenge of intellectual property rights and technology transfer. And in my view, to address some of these, challenges, they are mostly long-term in execution, so there are no quick solutions, and they are not exhaustive either. And in fact, in the 2 documents that were launched yesterday, the white paper and the roadmap, some of these issues were also addressed. But in my view, they could have been given more attention, especially as Bobina had referred to earlier on, that there's this developmentalist speak in the document, which to an extent I agree with. So some of the ideas that I think could help foster local content development with respect to AI innovation in Africa. AU institutions working on policy development, generally in the digital sector, are not necessarily just on AI, especially frameworks on emerging technologies, need to ensure more public participation. I'm sorry, you are going to be hearing a lot of kids speaking in the background. I'm not going to apologize because kids are part of, like Dr. Angela said. Yeah, so frameworks, especially, institutions, not just the AU, generally at the regional level, institutions developing policies on emerging technologies need to ensure more public participation. And key stakeholders, in my view, such as civil society, are also required. And in my view, this is not just an ask. It should be made very, very important. They should be able to contribute to these documents and prove to show that, their contributions have been used and are meaningful throughout the policy cycle, not just in developing the document, but in implementing it, especially in, domestic contexts. Additionally, states and other key stakeholders like civil society, international organizations, development partners, and people that are super enthusiastic about AI development in Africa. I think in walking the talk, it has now become very obvious, and it's needed now to support grassroots and locally driven AI innovations. And for me, I think one of the ways this can be done, which is already being done, is by organizing. I think Bobina referred to one of them earlier on, organizing, providing grant support and mentorship to innovators and organizations on the grassroots level who have worked so hard, especially with respect to AI issues in Africa. And also organizing competitions that could, showcase the current state of talent and capacity when it comes to AI innovation in the region. I understand that Udanepad also, recently, I think yesterday also inaugurated an AI and robotics competition. That is one of the examples. In addition to that, the strategy, in my view, should emphasize the need for states to prioritize women and girls' empowerment in the development of local AI innovation. Again, specifically targeting female innovators in this respect can be, also be encouraged. Like I said earlier, there's an urgent need to review intellectual property rights and technology transfer regimes for African countries when it comes to AI and other emerging technologies. And I say that because there's currently Sorry, can anyone hear me? Yes, thank you very much. So I was saying that there is the review is important because there's currently a stringent strict intellectual property rights regime, especially for African countries when it comes to accessing frontier technologies, especially those that benefit, sustainable development like agriculture, health, the environment. And also, I think it was in the roadmap, I can't remember, and it was in the white paper, there was a mention of an intellectual property strategy. I think it was just briefly mentioned. There was no additional information as to that. These are some of the issues also that I think are problematic with respect to the current publicly available document. And it would be interesting to know what is in that strategy, especially what is in the IP strategy, especially as it concerns frontier technologies and access to it by African countries. And also, I know the roadmap already speaks to this, the one that was released yesterday, but again, not as I think it could have been more elaborate. I think it's worth repeating, that local content development will need local data centers. And the strategy should provide guidance clearly for states on how to encourage investments for African data centers. In addition to that, states must also be encouraged to be more intentional in developing policies for AI at the domestic level to actually develop local content for innovation. For example, this can be done in many ways. One, it could be done through supporting the use of, African languages for natural language processing and other AI tools for more inclusion and access. Two, could involve developing accessible and quality educational resources on AI innovation and other emerging technologies. I'm aware that it's slow, but it's growing. Universities, research and development institutions are coming up with ideas and AI-related disciplines to, boost capacity when it comes to, local content in the region. These are some of the ways that I think the strategy can encourage local content. I'm not going to dwell on this too much because it's very, very broad, but I'm going to mention it, that a human rights-based approach, at least to caution the effect of developmentalist language in the, that we've seen so far in the white paper and in the roadmap, a human rights-based approach should be used in developing local content and equitable access to infrastructure. And basically, over the surface of it, the approach requires transparency, inclusion, participation, and accountability. I think, lastly, I'd like to say that, we have just about 6 years left in the implementation of the AU's digital transformation strategy, which I think the strategy is also part of. I know it's part of, not I think. And, while there have been some progress with respect to developing continental frameworks, strategies and all of that, in my view, I don't think that when you develop a strategy, it self-implements, no matter how perfect or imperfect it is. And in my view, I think it is very important that the AU and its supporting institutions should provide a clear plan for its members on how to implement such strategy, while also highlighting the importance of local content and equitable access to AI, resources and infrastructure. In my view, one way of doing this is to encourage diverse, inclusive, multi-stakeholder participation at the state level to develop national AI strategies or national strategies on emerging and new technologies that take the specific and contextual socioeconomic issues into context. And for me, I'm going to stop there for now. The conversation is very long. It's very complex, but I am glad to be here to have this chat with my co-panelists and with you, Florence. I look forward to a more interesting deliberation going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tomiwa. You really brought out a couple of key issues with respect to localizing AI, and you've given recommendations that I would say are really, really good in terms of which touch on investment, which also touch on in our own intellectual property laws and bringing that in. I know IP is something that is also big with respect to how AI is being used right now, especially with the growth of generative AI, as well as the development of data sets within the African continent, because if we are to create AI that is for Africa and used by Africans, it's going to need data sets from the continent, not from outside or from here shipped outside, because we are better placed to understand the nuances and even maybe certain stereotypes and biases that may come out within representative data. So in speaking up and picking up localizing AI, within that context, we also note that there are certain dynamics that come in with the use of artificial intelligence, which relate to elements of biases and discrimination that may come up. And we've noted that in some elements, some of those biases and elements of discrimination with the use of AI technologies that are not from the continent are also seeping into the way we utilize AI in Africa. So with that, we're going to sort of take a different turn and look at elements of gender perspectives. Dr. Tomio has also brought out elements of including female innovators and women within AI. So, and when I speak to gender here, I'm not just generalizing it to the female perspective or the feminist perspective. It's a holistic view of what gender actually is. So in looking at that, my next question would be to Bobina, and I would ask, what key gender considerations do you think must be taken into account in developing a continental policy response for AI development and deployment in Africa? Also in consideration of the research work that you've been doing, the Afrofeminist research work that you've been doing with respect to that and the interlink to artificial intelligence.
Right. Thank you for that question. And it's been interesting listening to the other panelists' views that I think feed into this very much. I think the conversation, in a sense, is there is continuity, and these bits and pieces are not separate, but rather they are a whole of just everything we're trying to unpack and therefore feed into the recommendations for the strategy. But first, like you said, in this case, like you said, you're not referring to the binary or just women in this case. And so I think I wanted to start from that bit of, when the question spoke to gender considerations. And I think that bit right there, I was just trying to think through it and, understand, what might this call for when we say gender considerations. And so I think I have just tried to approach it from, like you said, the different genders and the different expressions of people in their day-to-day existence. And so from that point, I think then in terms of what key considerations may be taken into account in developing the Continental AI strategy, I would just start from, like you said, the work that I've been doing, the Afrofeminist AI work, the principles work that we did publish last year is, I think, first, and I think it's very, very critical that we do approach conversations around gender because they very much speak to the idea of inclusivity, that we approach this conversation from a place of, the feminist perspective, I think gives us such a great place to unpack this issue and try and understand it best and chart paths forward. Because, with inclusivity, on the other end is exclusivity, people who have been left out of particular spaces. And so that speaks to power imbalances, who's heard, who's not heard, who's factored in decision making and who's not. And so to speak to that, I think I just wanted to start from a point of saying, I think the feminist perspective just gives a really great framework to understand these issues. And so whether it's understanding the diversities and like I said earlier, I shared earlier, the diversities and different needs of people. And I think here the idea of intersectionality comes in very strongly. Now, I know I have met on this call, I know most people are very easily comfortable with that, but I've been in spaces where people are just like, oh, researchers or people in the knowledge production space. So sorry to my co-panelists, people on the extreme end in academia, are use these terminologies that are not easily understandable to most people. But I think just this understanding that as a person, I exist through so many different frames of existence, and in the different spaces I get in, I'm either able to access the world or I'm blocked out from accessing the world. And so it's the same when it comes to digital technologies. I am, say, I'm a Black person. Am I able to easily access a particular technology? Am I, there are data sets that are representative of me. Say maybe I'm a Muslim woman. Do I have access? I am educated. I do not speak this particular language. Do I have access? So this broad understanding about diversities and our different realities, I think, is a great place to start. And therefore, how that feeds into policymaking is that the policymakers are able to think about an individual from that intersectional perspective, as opposed to planning that has so long looked at a universal user of sorts. And we have found that there is no universal user. I think Dr. Angela hinted on this a bit. The person who these technologies have been primarily developed for is not a lot of us here on the African continent, and being on the other end, again, Dr. Tomiwa spoke to this, where we're just receiving these technologies. How do we guide tech policy, AI policy in this case, that factors in these diversities and our different realities and needs, etc. So from that bit, then I think the gender considerations could best come in through a value system that could encourage this inclusivity of just different people and the different genders. And I think this guiding value system could factor in issues. Could factor in things like one, agency. I think agency very much speaks to, especially when it comes to AI systems, the idea of centering decision autonomy. We find with a lot of the systems that are adopted across the continent or are even being developed, but especially on the adoption end, especially within the public governance space, we do not have a say on whether we could choose to opt out. They're not voluntary, many of them are mandatory. And so we do not have a sense of agency, and we can't even question our governments because we're usually given blanket reasons like security, but we're not able to question. So I think the idea of agency, helps, the public and the users be able to put these questions across to their governments and be able to ask them now when it comes to the AU strategy as a whole to guide policy making that factors in that thinking. Is people's agency promoted in the development of these policies? Then there is also the issue of the idea of human dignity. We found a lot of these systems, unfortunately, are basically eroding at the very basis of our of our humanity, of fundamental human rights. I think Dr. Tomia spoke a lot to, the idea of human rights and etc. And so I think then human dignity would be looking at, especially when it comes to the modeling of human behavior. I think a good example here is with like the last Kenyan election, where we were very well aware with, the Cambridge Analytica's doing in influencing the election, but this was just brushed over like it wasn't a big deal and we just moved over. And this is just one little example, but there's so many examples, both in the public and the private space, where our motivations are being, basically persuaded by algorithms, and we don't have a say in this. And so I think the idea of human dignity is one that could guide this value system that makes sure that, gender considerations, basically promote, in a sense, inclusivity. And, Dr. Tomoya spoke to participation. I think it's very important that, meaningful participation. I think we speak to participation so many times, but it does not happen in a way that is truly meaningful. And so ensuring meaningful participation. I know we're time barred, and so I'll stop there, and thank you.
Thank you as well, Bobina, for contextualizing what looking at AI from a gendered perspective would look like and how that would play out in terms of policy, as well as how they come out in issues of diversity, in ensuring that diversity and inclusivity are things that are kept into consideration in developing AI policy. Now, keeping on with the conversation on looking at AI from a sort of gendered lens or a gendered perspective, my next question will be to Dr. Angela. Also, based on your own work experience and your research, what power dynamics and gender issues exist in the use, development, and deployment of artificial intelligence in Africa?
Right. The question of power is normally a very interesting and complicated. I normally say it's so entangled. But let me just try and talk about the dynamics and what are those three things that shape the power dynamics of how AI is shaping, particularly in Africa. Three things are at play here. One is data, two is knowledge colonialism, and three is funding. The agenda of AI centers around data, and we all know that. And one of the things that companies that everyone is running after and thirsting for is data. How they get that data is one of the most interesting bit, because there is a lot of power play about how do we access this data, how do we reach out. The language we use to get the data also is so important, because most of it is laced around power, getting people to think that by bringing data, I am being included. And that's another conversation for another day. And because that is what the language that I've had in Africa, that, oh, we need more African data. We need African data so that we can be included. But let me go back to where AI is coming from. AI is as old as 1950s. And between 1950 and 2022, 2023, 2024, when AI, the hype of AI came, there has been a lot of amassing of data from the global south. Unfortunately, this data has been picked, rebranded, and all that. Ask yourself, the many researches that were conducted in Africa that never ended, the reports never ended in Africa. What was happening? How is that research used? Who was it for? And where is it stored? Where is that data? There are companies that are storing massive and massive data from Africa and all that. And we are now talking about being included. But the question is, who determines the impressions of that inclusion? Who says who is being included, how and where and why, and what is the value of being included? Am I being included to be excluded, or am I being included in an already oppressive space? Already in Africa, from time immemorial, colonialism and all that, we have always been branded as inferior, the underdogs, the knowledges that are not important. And so we come in as part of that. And so being included is actually part of being included in an already oppressive space and all that. So there is the data thirst, where people have already amassed data, by the way. So while we are talking about data, the power, the unequal power here is that there are companies that are already storing part of our data, and they're still collecting that data until now. And we are allowing them, in the name of inclusion, to have that inevitable data access, including the documents that Africa, AU, and all these strategies are advocating. They're actually advocating for an unfettered access to African data, so that we can be included, so that we can be part of this development agenda. But the question is that what we are going to be? Number one, that's one of the power. The fact that the knowledge, unequal knowledge perception, we have all never been trusted. We have never been seen as knowledge contributors. We have never been seen as having any important thing to contribute to the global agenda. And because of that, our knowledge, all of a sudden we have become important. And we should ask ourselves why we have become important all of a sudden. Why is our data all of a sudden important? Because our data has become part of the currency. Our data is going to be commodified, let me put it that way, and currencyfied. And so we are no longer humans. We are actually commodities that are tradable, that can be sold, that can be traded and be used to make money, also that can be used to make useful products for someone else and to make profits and all that. And that's part of the unequal power relations that we are having there. The third one is funding. Where we are, even the technology that we are talking about, including the local technology production, it is being funded by big tech. And they fund their interest. They don't fund your interest, they fund their interest. And that is why funding is directed towards certain proportions. I don't know whether you have ever heard of a job advertisement in Africa that is asking for an AI ethicist, AI ethics person. Have you ever seen one? No. What we are having is AI developers, AI what. And because when you come in as an AI developer, you're going to develop what is in the interest of those particular companies. Even the funding of the policies is being funded, and which is something that I don't have to repeat, which we talked about. Now, this whole thing produces an unequal power relations that pushes us to something that I've observed recently, and I wanted just to talk about it. Produces what we call chameleon agency. We have become in Africa people who keep changing our color and trotting after where the money is. And even our own governments today, and that is how some of the policy strategies are coming on board, even our own governments today sit in state houses and all these other government spaces with tech companies to discuss policy strategies and all that. And you wonder, is a policy made for that company or is a policy made for the people? And that is why I'm saying that we have become chameleons who trot after where money is without thinking of the agency that we should have towards the people that we serve and all that. Some of us I have had complaints from tech developers who are talking about in as much as they want to develop technology that is suited and that is local, like Tomio was saying, they cannot develop because they have to serve the interest of their employers. And that is, there is a constriction and restricted agency on what can be produced in this particular space. And this all centers around an equal power relations that are happening within our own domains. So one of the things that I would recommend, just so that I may leave that question, is that we need what we call a data accountability in our own policies, which is critically missing because we do not define how does our data move? How is the movement supposed to be? What are the impressions that define the value of data? Can it be codified? Can it be accessed? Who accesses what? And can that access be codified too? And all that. And number two, we need a negotiated space for local AI development, not just blanketly talking about local AI development. Should be a negotiated space because the idea is you'll be given money, but then the money comes also with conditions. It comes also with goals. It comes with objectives. And I know like some, and I will talk for myself, I know some of us who critically attack that part of power. No one will fund me to attack a company. No company will fund me to attack it. Or no company will fund me to speak against its own interest. So, and this is where our governments come on board to front the interest of its own citizens, that negotiate space for local for local AI development. How do we negotiate aid? How does aid come? Does it come with conditions that serve other people, not us, and all that? And then can we at individual level also exercise some sort of agency towards our own people? I know people are developing technology, but where am I as Angela? I'll always say I speak for myself. I want to represent myself. When I sit back and negotiate something, funding and all that, am I pushing for the interest of the African citizen? Or am I going to play or perform the discourses of other people or other companies at the expense of the African community? So as we think about the power dynamics and all that, we need to to know that AI is not just going to come and be. It is going to be a negotiation between us and them. And there is going to be us and them domain over and over again until we are all going to call it our own. And there will never be us until all of us are in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Angela, for that insightful contribution, looking at power dynamics, bringing that out with respect to how it shows up in terms of investments, in terms of creation of policy, in terms of who sits in the room where policy is being made. Again, elements of accountability show up in what we have just talked about and what impressions and values it brings into the African continent in the development of policy. So the next question goes to Dr. Tomiwa, which is also structured with looking at AI policy, but at a more national level and in terms of implementation. So it's one thing to have a national AI policy, and it's another thing for it to be effective. And from the conversations we've been having so far, and the AU AI Continental Strategy is likely to also largely inform how national AI strategies are going to be developed, especially for the countries that already don't have a base for it or are still having it in plans. So it's one thing to have it, but it's one thing for it to also be effective. So what's the role of regional cooperation for the implementation of the successful continental AI strategy? And I'll segue this to say that we've also had the Malabo Convention, and the Malabo Convention has only just, I think it was last year, come into proper effect because it had taken quite a number of years for even African countries to ratify it. And this might also be a similar trend when it comes to what we will now have as the AU AI Continental Strategy. So my question would be, what in terms of regional cooperation, and what is the role of regional cooperation in ensuring that there will be an successful implementation of the Continental AI Strategy?
Yeah, thank you, Florence. I see we are pressed for time, so I'll go straight to my responses. One of the roles that the AU and other regional institutions, one of the things they could do in terms of regional cooperation for implementation should be, because what I've seen as an important golden thread that has cut through the conversations all afternoon has been especially the sidelining of, the true African voice when it comes to developing policy at the regional level. And for me, one of the ways I think this can be addressed is to facilitate and ensure the participation of regional and local civil society as buffers against well-worn and overused developmentalist outlook that ignore key issues of vulnerability and socioeconomic context in Africa. That's number one. Number two, the AU, and I'm mentioning the AU because whatever recommendation or ideas that you have must be directed to a particular stakeholder. They don't just exist in a vacuum for it to be implemented. So the AU / the AUDA, NEPAD, and REX, regional economic communities, need to address policy deficits, especially with respect to access to AI development in the region. For example, there's an urgent need for a strong intellectual property rights framework, especially in the context of digital and emerging technologies. Also, the AU, AUDA, NEPAD, and REX can work with states to review existing mechanisms, such as the African peer review mechanism, to accommodate peer evaluation on implementation of the strategy. And I say the APRM because we can keep talking about developing new solutions and all of that. We, in my view, we also haven't maximized the current mechanisms that we have, especially regional institutions that we have that could ensure careful monitoring, especially of digital policy development in the region. And also, I think regional cooperation could assist in implementation by assuring effective monitoring and evaluation tool within the strategy to track its implementation progress and challenges in domestic context. For example, ministries of digital economy and other key stakeholders, including civil society, can be responsible for such tracking at domestic level, and maybe the AUDA NEPAD at the regional level. Lastly, regional institutions need more partnerships with national, state, and non-state actors for implementation. There is need, for example, for regional institutions to coordinate digital transformation activities such as these, especially this particular strategy, more effectively, possibly through an existing mechanism or a new mechanism within the AU. This allows for specialized attention for these initiatives and their effective implementation in local context that take local context issues and needs into consideration before being implemented. And I understand that there are currently task forces with respect to monitoring and manning these initiatives, but maybe something more institutionalized that, seeing that this is not the conversation that is going to step in the next 10, 20, 30 years. So rather than have something temporary to monitor compliance or implementation at the local level, maybe AU institutions can now begin to look towards more institutionalized solutions for responsible AI development and innovation at the local level. So because of our time, I'm unable to go into detail with respect to my responses, but this is more or less like an overview of how I think, or the roles that I think regional cooperation could perform with respect to implementing a successful continental AI strategies. Thank you very much, Florence.
Lawrence, if you're speaking, you're muted.
I think we may have lost Dr. Tomiwa briefly, or is it myself?
I think I was not the one that was lost.
Okay, all right. Apologies.
I think everyone heard me, or less someone didn't
all
hear me. I'm happy to repeat myself.
Yeah.
That's fine.
All right, no worries. I think that brings us to sort of an end of the panelist discussion, and I would like to extend a very great thank you to all our panelists, Dr. Angela, Bobina, Dr. Tomiwa, for the amazing conversation that we have just had with respect to AI policy in Africa, looking at the approaches and different elements of it that have come up and are likely to also come up in looking at the AU AI Continental Strategy. So I will give us about 2 minutes to ask very pressing questions. We have 2 questions in the chat box. The first question is by Otosaki, and he says, thank you to the panelists. This was a very insightful conversation. And his question is, do we think there is room for the adoption of just transition principles into an AI economy? Either Dr. Tomiwa, Bobina, or Dr. Angela could handle this.
Quickly, let me respond to that. Yes, I think in addition to ensuring that we prepare for the future, I think there is need to pay attention into how we transition also importantly into that future. And for me, what that would ideally entail has been what, for example, Dr. Ndaka and Bobina have spoken extensively about earlier on, to pay attention to where we are currently so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past that, takes us one step forward, but 100 steps backward. So where are we, and what will amount to justice in moving forward to where we need to be? That would be my response. So yes, I think there's room to, straighten out what we need to do and where we are, and what we need to get where we are. That is the way I see. Yes, it's very important. There's room for it. Not that even if there's no room, we need to create room for it, for what is just before we move ahead. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm seeing Bobina has also responded to your question, Saki, on the chat as well. You could take consideration of that as well. The next question we have is from Emily. She would love to. Yes.
Just a minute, Florence.
Yes. Sorry, Dr. Angela. Go ahead.
Sorry. I'm just thinking that just transition. I am one person who really keeps throwing myself off those broad statements like a just transition. But to add on what Bobina is saying, not Bobina, but Tomiwa, is simply, I'll add one very comment to that just transition. Just transition is achievable, but as long as we are part of defining what that just transition is. Because it may, most of the time, it's normally a thrown bone that we are supposed to adopt. Just like the SDGs. SDGs have been over and over again been thrown to us, but have they ever been our own tools or good to say statements? So I think to respond to that is to say that, like Tomiwa said, that we need to start defining those terms and defining them by our terms so that justice makes sense to Africa, not what justice makes sense to the other different kinds of people. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Angela. So the next question is by Emily, and she asks, she would love to hear more on whether panelists think that AI can drive green data center development with associated jobs. Dr. Tomiwa also mentioned this. Some of this has also been announced in Kenya. So either of the panelists can go, and then I can proceed.
Probably I can throw a little bit of whatever they are, my ideas about AI and driving broadly the conversation about green economy, or whatever we're calling environmental sustainability, green energy, green whatever. Yeah, and that has been a controversial space because the fronted response, and mostly in the global space, is that AI can solve environmental and climate issues. But then there has been a lot of muted and silenced conversations about key findings that highlight that AI is actually one of the highest consumers of energy globally. And by 2030, it is said that it is highlighted that AI will be consuming, is it by 2050, 2030, AI will be consuming 25% of global energy. And we all know that most of this global energy is, or most of the energy that is used globally is not green. Most people are using energy from coal and from fossil fuels. And so we should be asking ourselves, is this a way of just talking about AI being able to solve climate issues? At the same time, it is actually rebounding back the same carbon that we are talking about addressing. And so being a 25% consumer means that it is going to be producing, and it's already producing, a very large carbon footprint to the atmosphere. And that is where AI is, especially in the era of generative AI. Now, that is one. There is a question of water, which is one of the most controversial issues now in US. And now Spain are experiencing issues with dry spells because of long dry spells because of data centers. Data centers are said to be consuming copious amounts of water per day. A data center would consume water that can be used in a village for a whole month, the village getting a daily supply of water. And that is one thing that people are not talking about, the accountability of water. Actually, because of AI, water is going to be enlisted as one of the most expensive items in the what do we call it, in the global economy. And three, we're talking about e-waste. And we are also talking about exploitation of other environmental spaces and landscapes and all that. So when we're talking about green economy, what do we refer to green economy? Do we refer to AI for climate, or are we also talking about AI with climate? Or are we talking about also actually addressing the critical issues of what AI is doing to the climate and also the idea of green? So green is also another blurry buzzword that is going to be driven, and it is actually being driven, but we need to start raising some of the critical issues, because we are the global suppliers, or the largest suppliers of what we are going to be calling rare metals that are going to be powering AI. And we are also going to be highest recipients. Africans have always been victims of climate change. Carbon footprint that we don't release, but we receive the effect of it from the global northerners who produce this carbon footprint. And we're also going to be the ones to struggle when the issues of water, and particularly if we are going to elevate large data centers within Africa. So I believe this is another conversation for another day, Florence and the organizers. We will need to dive into the conversation about climate, about energy, about what green, and whether AI is actually being greenwashed, or we are just endorsing techno fixes and techno solutionism to climate change issues. I would leave that at that, but we can have that conversation in another day. Thanks.
Thank you so much for those contributions. As you can see, the conversation on AI is very multifaceted and cuts across different areas. So with that, I would like to thank all the panelists once again for making it to this first AIRA Talk of the year. It has been a very insightful conversation. I'm hoping the participants have also found it to be quite insightful. I don't see any other questions, and we are out of time. So it would be great to wrap it up once again. Thank you so much. I'll hand it over to Adebro just for any closing remarks you may have.
Thank you, Florence, and thank you to all the speakers and all the panelists. I appreciate your very insightful contributions. Thank you to everyone who participated as well. This AIRA Talks will be uploaded on our YouTube page, so you can look out for that. We'll also post it on our social media accounts with a link to the YouTube page. Once again, thank you so much. We have other AIRA Talks coming up across the year, every quarter. We'll see you there. Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you.